Okay, welcome to episode 67 of the Apple Podcast by Lexstar at maxfutures.com. This is April 15th, and it's been a very interesting week again in Apple world. So let's get to some of the big stories this week and some of the little stories, and also discuss all sorts of interesting Apple stuff. So here we go. Okay, so the big news this week was that Apple announced the next version of Final Cut Pro at a Final Cut Pro users group super meeting that I believe was held in Las Vegas. Yes, and it was the 10th annual Las Vegas Super meeting. And let me give you a little bit of the backstory here. The backstory is that there had been rumors that Apple has been working on a new version of Final Cut Pro for quite some time. It may have discreetly showed some editors in the movie business or people who are professionals in editing some versions of the new Final Cut Pro in the past few months. But nobody knows exactly what Apple has been doing with this very important movie editing software that Apple has sort of dominated the industry with in the last few years, or maybe even the last 5 or 6 years. And then word came out that Apple had contacted the Final Cut Pro users group and asked them to bump their speakers for April 12th, Tuesday night, in Las Vegas at the Super Meet. And apparently the Final Cut Pro users group had some pretty important guests to speak that night, including the director of Clerks, Kevin Smith, and other people. And the rumors were that Apple had bumped them all and asked the supergroup to have Apple, be on stage that night. And so, sure enough, the rumors were correct. And I'm looking here at a very useful blog called photographybay.com. And this meeting was not open to the public. You had to be invited to the supergroup meetup. And Apple did not allow streaming, but this website did live blog from the event. And Apple, sure enough, gave a peek at how the new Final Cut Pro, which is called Final Cut Pro 10, is looking. And so you could see there were a lot of people at this event. You know, if you're looking at the video of this podcast, I have the website photographybay.com showing, and you can see, there's a blow-by-blow on this website. At 9 o'clock, the spotlights in the shape of an X appeared on the curtain, and I guess Apple was revealing, Final Cut Pro X as the name of the new version of the software. And so there had been a lot of anxiety about this, you see, because I don't know if you're familiar with Final Cut Pro, but it's a high-end product, and the software up till recently, has come in a bundle, and you have to pay, I think, close to $1,000 to get it. So it's really for professionals, and for I think around $200 or less, you could get the light version of Final Cut called Final Cut Express, and I have that. And basically, Final Cut Express is if you want to graduate up from iMovie. And there had been a lot of anxiety in the professional world where people use Final Cut Pro that Apple is going to dumb down Final Cut Pro and make it more like iMovie. Now, personally, I like iMovie. And the reason I like it is because it's really easy to use, but we'll get to that. So here's what happened. So at, I guess, 10 p.m. Las Vegas time, someone came out and they announced Final Cut Pro, and they went over the statistics regarding how Final Cut Pro measures up against its competitors, which are Avid. Avid is a very important company in the non-linear editing world of software, and also Adobe Premiere. And so Apple had Peter Steinhauer come out, who's the architect of Final Cut Pro, And he basically said that they rebuilt Final Cut Pro X from the ground up. So it's not released yet. So this is just a peek, revealing by Apple. So what are the big things? Well, the first big thing they announced is that Final Cut Pro will be 64-bit confirmed. So up till now, even though it's an enterprise software for editing movies, which take a lot of demand, Apple has only had that as a 32-bit program. So everyone expected it would go 62-bit. Now, then they showed a screenshot of the new user interface. And basically, if you look at the screenshot, it looks like a souped-up, more intricate version of iMovie. One of the first things they said is that you'll have fully color management in Final Cut based on color sync. Now, why is that important? Because currently, when you buy Final Cut, you buy it in a bundle, and there are separate apps, and the separate apps include a color correcting software as well as motion. And it looks like the color correction is going to be built into Final Cut Pro X. The other thing that they announced is that you're going to have resolution-independent playback system up to 4K formats. And to be able to deliver that, they said that Apple is leveraging Grand Central Dispatch and that you can use all 8 cores. And background rendering will be built into the application. So what does this mean? Look, I'm not a pro in movie editing, but I do a lot of movie editing. And my understanding of this is that Final Cut Pro X will be able to just on the fly bring in different formats of movies. Look, we shoot movies in MPEG-4 on our iPhone, but there are also professionals who are shooting movies in very high format, known as 4K, using the RED movie cameras, which cost, $3,000-$4,000 to $10,000. And 4K is really the format of the future, but it takes up a lot of data. Like, to give you an example, we shoot high definition film, or I shoot high definition film in on DV. A DV is a format that certain mini DV tapes would record on, and 4K is a much higher format. Okay, so being able to import these really high data files that are going to be shot, let's say, in RED's 4K, as well as being able to import just sort of low data files like the MPEG-4s that are shot on an iPhone. This is critical. So the other thing is that Apple says that you're going to be able to use Grand Central Dispatch. Now, Grand Central Dispatch is that technology that Apple has that helps developers create programs that use multiple cores of a processor or multiple processors at once. Because one of the challenges for anybody writing software programs is how to have a program efficiently use multiple processors and multiple cores. And as Macintoshes and other computers, go forward, it's harder for the chip manufacturers to just have like one processor keep ramping up the speeds. Because remember, there was a time we'd go the processors would go from like 1.5 gigahertz to 1.7 gigahertz to 2 gigahertz. And then that sort of maxed out. And, we haven't really, we're hovering around 3 gigahertz. So what Intel and other chip processors do is they put multiple processors on one core. So my iMac currently has 4 processors, but in virtual mode, it can go to 8 cores. And Apple's Grand Central Dispatch, which Apple has been, talking about for several years, is supposed to make it easier for developers to create apps that use multiple processors. Now, they're claiming that this new Final Cut Pro X can use up to 8 cores, And more importantly, it can do background rendering built into the application. Now, what is background rendering? Background rendering is, sometimes you bring in, let's say you're bringing in different media and different compressions and different files, and you want it to be, you want the project to be ultimately at a different compression rate or a different file, size rate. Well, you're going to have to change those files. The computer's going to have to change them to conform to the new data, the data compression that you want. So that process is called rendering, which is when the computer is changing the movie, format. Rendering is also when you apply effects to a movie clip and the computer processes those changes. That's called rendering. And in the old days, that took a long time. You would literally, bring in a clip and spend a long time waiting for the computer to render it. And so Final Cut Pro X is going to be able to render that in the background. So you're going to be able to import clips in of any kind and render them in the background while you still use the program. So that's great. I mean, here's what they say. No more waiting for ingest. Media is ready for editing even before ingest is completed. On the way in, media can be analyzed for stabilization. Deal with rolling shutter on the way. Now, then Final Cut also seems to be borrowing stuff from iMovie. And iMovie has people detection and shot detection. And Final Cut Pro now has people detection, shot detection. And it's also going to have options for sound too. So there's going to be sound cleanup, sound editing, options to rid, hum, rumble, etc. And you're also going to be able to tag your clips with keywords, and you're going to be able to, according to this website of the people who were there, you're going to be able to select ranges inside your clip and apply keywords to those ranges instead of just keywording the clip. So this is pretty wild. So there's not going to be sub-clipping, but rather you're going to be able to pick any part of a clip and give a keyword. So this is great for really complex movie projects. Also, you're going to have something called smart collections. Now, again, this is something that we see from the iLife suite, like iPhoto and iMovie, which is you import a lot of movie and sound clips into a editor like Final Cut Pro, and now you're going to be able to have folders that are smart collections that are going to look for certain media types, or maybe even the keywords that you put in, and pull in certain shots into the folder. So it's going to be a better way to organize your movie and sound clips. Now, the other thing they have is something called magnetic timeline, and basically this is very good for editing. It says if you slide a clip down the timeline, long clips, secondary audio won't collide with other clips. The other clips will drop down to a new track and nothing is pushed out of sync. Now, I use Camtasia to do screen recording on my Mac, and there is this issue with any movie editing program of when you're moving a lot of clips around, sometimes you can knock a clip out of the way. And so this magnetic timeline means you won't knock other clips out of the way. So it's easier to move a lot of clips around. There's also something called clip connections. Primary audio and video are lock synced together. So there's no way to accidentally knock it out of sync. That's another problem. A lot of times when you're editing a lot of video and audio, you can knock audio tracks out of sync with the video. And so this program is going to be much better at keeping that in sync. The other thing they have is compound clips. You can combine multiple clips into a single clip to make sequencer easier to understand. So this is, again, this is if you're really into complex movie editing with lots of clips. Sometimes you have a whole bunch of clips, some clips layering over other clips, and you want to drag them and move them together. and now you can sort of treat them as a compound clip to work together. Now, let's see what else. There's going to be inline precision editor. And again, this is if you double click on the seam between clips, you get a timeline opening up, and it shows you like your ability to sort of, here I'm going to zoom in. You're going to be able to then edit. And iMovie already has that. iMovie already has this precision editing. I'm not sure how much people are going to be thrilled with that who are pros. The other thing it's going to have is auditioning. You're going to be able to compare edits and effects during the organization process. You can throw B-rolls into timeline and non-destructive. So you're going to be able to try out different scenarios of clips. So it ended with, I guess, the chief architect making an appearance. And they showed an audio commercial spot that was shot on Final Cut Pro X. And here you can see the interface. Now let me just show you. So this is the interface. It looks a lot like iMovie. And, I think it looks kind of cool. Now to give you to let you see, well, let's see what Final Cut Pro looks like just as a comparison. Okay, so I don't have Final Cut Pro, but I have Final Cut Express, the last version. And, it's essentially the same as Final Cut Pro, but it doesn't have some of the higher end features. And as you can see, Final Cut Express, which is nice, is kind of old school. And so, you have here this timeline and a sequencer, and you drag the media here. And here you have a browser where you can, line up your sequences. And then you have a viewer here, and then you have a canvas where it all plays. Now, I'll be honest with you. Like, I've had Final Cut Express for quite some time, and before that I had some versions of Final Cut. And although I tried to use it, whenever I wanted to make a home movie or any sort of project, I would use iMovie because it just was much quicker. Because the current version of Final Cut Express, you've got to import, get your media all collected, and it doesn't render automatically. If there are files that are not like in the form that you want to play in Final Cut Express, you got to render it first. And in iMovie, you don't have to do that. It just comes in and you're ready to edit. And so when I want to edit quickly, I don't use Final Cut Express. So I'll be honest, I'm looking forward to the Final Cut X because I do like that it's got some of the UI sensibilities and the pragmatism of iMovie. Okay, so the big news is that it's only going to cost $299, and it's going to be sold through Apple's App Store for the Mac. Now, before we go into the significance of $290, one thing you should know is that the current version of Final Cut Pro is really a suite of a lot of apps, including Motion, including the Sound app, including the Color app. And it looks like maybe the Sound app and the Color app are subsumed in Final Cut X, but nobody knows. So it could be that Apple sells the other apps that come with Final Cut Pro separately in the Mac store. But still, it's a good deal because currently, the suite costs, I think, close to $1,000, and if not more. And so it's prohibitive. I do not buy Final Cut Pro because it's too expensive. But I may buy the $299 version of Final Cut Express because I don't need Motion and I don't need these other apps. And I'd be willing to step up from iMovie to Final Cut X. The other big advantage is that because it's being sold through the Mac App Store, you can now install Final Cut X, or you will be able to, on multiple computers, because I think you can install any program you buy through the Mac App Store on up to maybe 5 computers. And all they have to do is have the same Mac App Store account. So if you have a household with multiple computers, you don't have to buy multiple licenses of Final Cut X. You could just buy the $299 version and have it on different computers so other family members could use it. So look, I think this is good. I mean, I think the big things are that it has more power. It is going to be able to run on multiple cores, use 64-bit, but plus it has a much more modern interface. And the iMovie interface is very much touch-oriented, and we're going to touch, and it looks like Final Cut X is very touch-oriented. So overall, I think it makes sense that Apple's going in this direction, and it should come out this summer, and I'm really looking forward to it. Okay, so some of the other news this week I saw on MacRumors.com. A story came out on Sunday, April 10th, that Steve Jobs has authorized a biography on himself that's going to come out in 2012. And the book is going to be called I, Steve, the Book of Jobs, will be published in early 2012. And the writer that is going to write it is actually someone quite famous, Walter Isaacson. And he's written all sorts of books. He's been, I think, one of the editors of Time magazine. But he's written a book on Kissinger, Albert Einstein, Benjamin Franklin, and he's a very good biographer. So it should be interesting. You know, I don't think Steve Jobs has ever done an authorized biography. And apparently he's interviewed Steve Jobs and members of his family and colleagues at Apple and competitors. So it should be, I think it'll be honest and fair. I don't think it's going to be a puff piece because Walter Isaacson is a serious biographer. So he's not going to, it's not going to be one of these vanity projects. And I think it should be really interesting. And it could be that, look, that Steve Jobs has been sick lately and maybe he wants to tell his story, his take on what's happened. So, I'm looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a great book. Obviously, it's something we should all read. Okay, one of the more interesting stories this week came on Computer World's blog, and it's a story that Apple is going to probably create an actual Apple TV, something that's a TV. And I've been saying this for years. I mean, Apple eventually is going to make a real TV. It's not just going to be a little box, an Apple TV that you connect to a TV. I think they're actually going to make a TV, and I think they're going to come up with revenue and content. And so over at Computer World, Johnny Evans, he thinks that maybe this summer there'll be TV everywhere. And this is what he said. TV anywhere for a set fee. You'll be able to access the TV shows you want. It is possible there might be an iAds element here, an attempt to replicate the kind of ads revenue networks gain when offering broadcast content. The system will be intelligent and portable. You'll be able to begin watching a TV show on your Apple TV connected television, then on your iPad, the Mac in the den, and catch the conclusion on your iPhone. This will be Apple's play for a market currently dominated by cable and satellite providers. It would be nice to see some trans-territorial licensing too, but that will likely take time. If these plans bear fruit, these will be where Apple reinvents television, and this could be Steve Jobs' one more thing as he turns Apple TV hobby into yet another wave of disruptive change. I can't wait to read his biography. So look, I agree a lot with this article. I think Apple is headed this way, and I think they have to. I think pressure's on Apple because content is being delivered everywhere. You've got Amazon streaming video. You've got Netflix streaming video. You have Google with YouTube now, putting movies up, full-length movies. I started watching a full-length movie with Danny DeVito called, I think, A Girl Walks Into a Bar on YouTube. And so there's content everywhere that's coming through the internet. And then we even see the cable companies like Comcast and Time Warner streaming TV shows to iPads. And so Apple has this AirPlay technology, and I think this is part of what Johnny Evans is talking about. And Apple needs to sort of compete in the content. So I think what he's saying is that, with the iPad 2 offering HD output to a connected TV, and also the iPhone 5 probably doing that, we're going to have TV anywhere. But I don't think he really spells it out well as to what Apple's going to do. And I think Apple needs to do a number of things. I mean, first of all, I think the current iPad 2 is essentially a better version of Apple TV than the current Apple TV, because the current iPad 2 can run apps, and not only can it run apps, but it can mirror those apps to a high-def TV through the HDMI out connection. And previously I talked about how I was using Real Racing 2 on a big screen TV through this connection. But the beauty of it is all the movie streaming apps like Netflix, like Al Jazeera TV, like ABC TV that currently run on the iPad, you can connect that to a big TV. You could just anchor it there. And here's the thing, if the iPad is so thin anyways, well, why can't you just build it into a TV? So one thing Apple should do is license Apple TV and have manufacturers like LG, like Sony, like Panasonic, like whoever, Samsung, build in Apple TV into their TVs, because then you could just stream, through the internet all sorts of content through apps. Imagine if TVs had Apple TV or the iPad built into it, and you could just download into the TV the apps that you already bought for the iPad and run them on the TV. Apple could totally change the whole television market. So that's one thing. Here are the three things that I think Apple is going to do. They're gonna license, the iOS operating system to TV manufacturers so that they can run the same sort of apps that are on the iPad and the same sort of content. Two, they're going to create content. Apple has $60 billion, and maybe it should go YouTube's route and Netflix's route, because both YouTube and Netflix are developing their own content. Netflix bought the rights to a TV series starring Kevin Spacey, and Google is, giving money to people to produce better content for YouTube, as well as having movies appear on YouTube. So Apple needs to, the second leg is going to get content. But the third leg is ensuring that people have high-speed connections in their home. And currently, Apple, as well as Google, is in some risk that the cable companies and like Verizon, which has Fios, could throttle the high-speed internet connection that you pay for. By throttling, I mean they could limit the ability of non-cable companies and non-phone companies to deliver massive content like video streaming. Right now, we get that, but there are some efforts by the cable companies to prevent Netflix from streaming video at an unlimited rate to your TV through the internet. And that's a danger. So maybe, we know that Google is rolling out an experiment to provide 1 gigabit internet connection in Kansas City. But maybe Apple should go that route too. Maybe Apple should partner with some other major company to distribute high-speed internet, both wirelessly and through fiber optic around the country. Now that's, I don't know, Apple's into high margin, and that's almost like a utility function. So I don't know if Apple would go that route. But ultimately, that's the way to destroy the current TV paradigm. Because the current TV paradigm stinks, right? We have these cable boxes. You pay a lot of money. I pay like $170 a month to have 2 cable TV boxes, to have HBO, and to have high-speed internet all through my cable company. And really, I shouldn't pay more than $100 to have really high-speed content in one internet connection and all the content coming through there. So anyways, it's a very interesting article by Johnny Evans, and it's very thought-provoking. Okay, now Apple's Lion hasn't been officially released to the public, and really you're only supposed to see the betas of Lion if you're a developer and have a developer's account. But that hasn't stopped one website, appleinsider.com, from going through some of the features that are in the Lion beta. And they published an article on Thursday, April 14th, that gives a peek at what's going on in Lion. And so one of the things they're highlighting is that Lion will have new multi-touch gestures, dock integration for Expose, Launchpad, and Mission Control. So basically they point out that the iOS is a redesign of Mac OS X. And by that they mean that the new version of the Mac operating system borrows a lot of the aesthetics and the the UI design of the iOS interface, which is, for the iPad and the iPhone. And here it gives an example. For example, Dashboard, according to Apple Insider, is being transformed from a nebulous widget layer that appears above the Mac desktop into a utility area that slides in from the left of the desktop, much like the iOS controls that slide in from the left of the multitasking bar to present volume, brightness, audio playback controls, and a screen orientation lock on the iOS devices. It goes on to say that Expose is being made more accessible, and that rather than having 4 Expose modes, tile all windows, windows of one app, hide all windows to show desktop and show dashboard, it instead invoked by key commands or mouse buttons. Lion improves upon Snow Leopard's multi-touch gestures to make tapping into Expose even easier. So it goes on to say that you can use gestures of 4 fingers down on the trackpad to get to a lot of the stuff. And, let's just say I've fooled around with Lion a bit. And I'll tell you, when you get Lion, you should probably get Apple's Magic Trackpad, because it really works well with the touch interface and the swiping. The swiping works really well. So anyways, check out the article. It it gives a little preview of what's there. For example, it says that Spaces is no longer an expert feature that must be turned on manually. In Lion, it's always on and it's made more accessible to novice users through the iOS-like use of full-screen apps, which take up an entire space. So rather than juggling a variety of virtual desktops, Spaces is now a visual tool for moving between a number of full-screen apps, much more like the iPad. So look, I've got the beta, and I can't wait till the final version comes out this summer. I think you're all going to love it. Okay, so how is Apple doing, and how is the Mac operating system doing and the iOS system? Well, there's a very interesting article on something called asimoco.com, something called Curated Market Intelligence. And the article's headline is First Quarter PC Forecast, Windows down 2%, Mac plus iPad up 250%. And it's a very good article, because you see what happens is when people compare Apple's performance in the computer world, they always just compare Macintoshes to Windows computers. But is that a really fair analogy in this age when we have the iPad? Because for a lot of people, the iPad is now sort of substituting as a device that replaces the computer. Not for everyone. So the article basically says, Charles Arthur of The Guardian writes that PC sales may have passed their peak. And he says, that's a powerful, concise statement. It's backed up by a quote from Gartner's Mikako Kitagawa. And he says this was the third consecutive quarter of mobile PC shipment declines in the U.S. Now, but this guy who wrote this article in Asimoco, he points out, but there are several problems with both IDC's and Gartner's analysis of the market. He goes on to say it's hard to make out casualty figures. He says there's a separation by vendor but not by operating system, and there's exclusion of devices hired to do the same jobs as PCs. What he's talking about is why they're excluding iPads. So he went out and did his own analysis, and he retrieved Gartner's public statements on the overall market and layered actual Mac and iPad units sold. And he also added his own estimates for the first quarter of 2011 that just ended. And what he gets is that if you include the iPad, the total PC growth is shown by the blue line, and here is the graph. And it shows that the market peaked during the recovery, but it is now slowing considerably. The green line shows the PC industry excluding both the Mac and the iPad, although it might include Linux or computers sold without an OS. The label PC is a fairly close approximation. The red line shows the behavior of the Mac franchise. It's well ahead of the overall market with 3 times the growth. This has been the pattern for 18 quarters. But the most telling line is the orange line, which includes both Macs and the iPad, where growth is measured usually in single digits. The iPad business brings in 3 digits. So basically, it's phenomenal growth for the iPad. The near tripling of unit sales is symptomatic of fundamental change that cannot be ignored. So basically, he's saying, look, this is really the growth of the iPad and Mac. So, I think he's right. I think people are ignoring that the iPad is really a computer, and it's growing rapidly. Now, in 5 days, April 20th, Apple is going to announce its earnings for the first quarter of this calendar year. And already one major investment bank, JP Morgan, has raised its projections of Apple's earnings through 2012 in expectation of continued growth from the iPhone and iPad. And this comes from the Apple Insider website. And Apple Insider says that JP Morgan analyst Mark Moskowitz issued a note to investors early Friday with revised estimates, and he reiterated the firm's December 2011 price target of $450 a share for Apple and an overweight rating for Apple. Now, according to Apple Insider, Markowitz raised his projections for Apple's earnings per share for the second quarter of fiscal year 2011 to $5.39, up from $5.21, and he increased his revenue estimates for the March quarter from $23.83 billion to $24.42 billion. So what does this mean? Well, look, in mumbo jumbo talk, what JP Morgan is saying is that they think that Apple's going to do really well for the quarter, and that JP Morgan analyst Mark Moskowitz thinks that Apple's stock price will eventually get to $450 a share this year. Now, currently, Apple stock is trading around $330 a share. It's been down lately. I'm not sure why it's down. It could be down because people are concerned about the supply of parts from Japan. I'm not sure. But the point is, a lot of the analysts are still bullish on Apple. And again, Apple's going to do its quarterly announcement of its financial results on April 20th. But my expectation is it's going to do well because, look, these lines for the iPad 2 are just phenomenal. I think people are still trying to get the iPad 2, and, so I think they're selling a lot of it. Okay, so one of the nicer things that happened this week is, is that there was a video up on YouTube as part of a project campaign to stop young people from committing suicide and to prevent bullying. And I guess various corporations' employees contributed to this project. And Apple employees did. And, Apple is usually very secretive and doesn't allow really employees to blog and officially, blog as Apple people. And Apple employees did this video where they come out and they talk personally about, what it was like for them as a kid, trying to basically inspire kids that it gets better, so, a lot of people were moved by this video. Altogether, it's, I guess, 6 minutes and 3 seconds long. But here is a clip just to give you a taste of what people are saying. And you can check it out yourself on YouTube. Just search for Apple employees. It gets better, and you'll find it.
I knew from my earliest memory that I was gay.
I was, kind of a loner growing up.
I was very awkward.
Called every name in the book.
They'd say fag or nerd, egghead.
Like this, like that.
People walking by calling me a waste.
Yeah, the mainstream didn't want us.
And high school's kind of shitty. I mean, it's like...
just there being no allowance for someone to be different.
There were, definitely nights those years where I would go to sleep and just be like, I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to wake up in the morning.
Okay, so there's been a lot of rumors that Apple is soon going to come out with cloud computing or cloud storage, expanding on MobileMe and making the Mac and the iOS devices more cloud-centric, because that seems to be the movement in the industry, particularly with the Android devices, particularly with Amazon now providing this cloud-based streaming music service where you can put your music up into storage with Amazon. And so there's a lot of pressure on Apple to be cloud-based. And one of my favorite bloggers, John Gruber, over at Daring Fireball on Friday, April 15th, today, came out with a very lengthy blog post that is thought-provoking, and it's titled Cutting That Cord, and with the subtitle, A Cursory High-Level Overview of the Current Status of Cloud-Based Syncing in iOS Devices. And he starts off by saying that he bumped into Josh Topolsky, the former editor of Engadget, and they talked about, the iPad 2. And basically, Topolsky's view was that as a device and hardware and software, Apple is ahead of the curve with the iPad 2, but that Apple is a generation behind on the cloud side. So Gruber goes on to basically, I think, defends Apple, and he basically, I think, correctly points out that full court press with cloud services is not really feasible right now. And he basically, I guess one of his main points is that, look, we can't really back everything up to the cloud right now because we don't have the data speed with the internet. I mean, and he's correct because, look, upload speeds right now are very limited. I have Time Warner high-speed cable. I get like 30 megabits per second download, but I get, frankly, a slower upload speed on my high-speed cable through my cable line than I do with the AT&T iPhone 4. I get faster upload speeds, I think 1.5 megabytes on the iPhone, but less than 1 megabyte on the Mac. And look, I back up to Backblaze, and I think it took me something like 2 or 3 months to upload 200 to 300 gigabytes worth of data from my Mac to the cloud. So I think one of Gruber's main points is that, look, Apple's going to eventually go to cloud-based services, but it's not really feasible to back up like your entire, iPad on the fly or your iPhone on the fly to the cloud. My iPad can store 64 gigabytes worth of data. I mean, how quickly is that going to go up into the internet through any sort of connection? And the same for the iPhone. So, overall, he's got a very good and interesting article. One point he makes is Apple gets a rap for being bad at or simply not caring about the cloud. This is what Gruber says. But that's not accurate. And he goes on to say, it's just that they're moving things there one piece at a time. It's already the case that a large amount of songs, movies, TV shows, and especially apps are purchased from the iTunes Store by iOS users directly from their iPhones and iPads. That's the first step Apple took away from iTunes on the Mac PC as a required hub. So I think he's got a good point. I think his point is that, look, Apple shouldn't rush into making everything cloud-based because we just don't have that capability for a really great experience. So, I don't know, what do you think? Do you agree with John Gruber? I agree with him. And, but I'm still looking for cloud-based services to expand by Apple, and I think they will. I think any day now, maybe next week, we'll see the announcement of additional mobile Me services. Okay, so Apple this week released some upgrades or updates. And Apple released an update to the iOS 4.3, and so now there is 4.3.2. And the release, according to Cult of Mac, the release notes read, the new version fixes an issue that occasionally caused blank or frozen video during a FaceTime call. It fixes an issue that prevented some international users from connecting to 3G networks on iPad Wi-Fi 3G, and it contains the latest security updates. Now, if you do this update and your iPhone is jailbroken, it's going to wipe out your jailbreak. And so, I don't necessarily recommend doing that if you have a jailbroken iPhone. Now, Apple also released this week an update to Safari for the Mac. That's Safari 5.0.5, and also a Mac OS X security update called 2011 number 2. And according to Cult of Mac, the release notes read, this update is recommended for all Safari users and includes the latest security updates. So it's mainly a security update. And the Safari update for security update says it is recommended for all users and improves the security of Mac OS X 10. So it's nothing particularly, dramatic, and it's probably worth making the upgrade. Okay, so if you really want an iPhone 4 that's white, and you've been longing for one since last June when Apple announced that it was going to be selling an iPhone 4 that's white but never delivered one, well, you soon might be getting a white iPhone 4. And MacNN and other sites have reported this week that Apple has started production on the long-planned white iPhone 4, and that Foxconn has started a factory run that suggested it could be ready to launch inside of a month. And this came from a Reuters tip. That this is going to happen without a hard release date. So, we've multiple times have heard that a white iPhone was going to come, but the latest rumors are that it is going to come. Frankly, I don't care. I'm happy with my black iPhone 4. White, I don't know. White doesn't move me anymore. And but I do think it will make some people happy. They've been longing for this. Now, good thing if you're a Safari user on the Mac. The Wall Street Journal reported this week that Apple has finally added a Do Not Track privacy tool to a test version of the Safari browser, which would keep customers' online activities from being monitored by marketers. And according to the Wall Street Journal, the tool is included with the latest test release of Lion, which is a version, the beta version for developers. And the Wall Street Journal says that the final version of the operating system, which is scheduled to be released this summer. So this is a good sign that Apple is finally integrating Do Not Track tools into Safari. Google has done it, and Microsoft has done it. And, it's ultimately good for your privacy. And basically, Do Not Track tools in browsers automatically send out messages to websites and online advertising networks requesting that users movements around the web not be tracked. And the system will only work if web companies agree to respect people's tracking preferences. So this is something that various congressmen had asked the browser industry to implement. And the article mentions that Republican Representative Cliff Stern of Florida introduced privacy legislation that would encourage companies to offer more information to consumers about how they're being tracked. So look, all around, I think this is important as we, have these powerful computer and internet tools. Tracking becomes a real issue, and privacy does too. Okay, so if you're a developer, Apple also released this week an update to its developer tool, Xcode, and now it's to version 4.0.2. And this comes from macgasm.com. That's where I read this one. And apparently Apple has, only released 2 release notes to indicate any changes. The first is, quote, fixed a bug with OpenGL apps running the iOS simulator on some Macs. And according to the story, this is probably the change that will affect most users. And the second release note is that, quote, additional bug fixes and stability improvements. So I don't know how many people who listen to this podcast use Xcode, but Xcode is essentially the tool that Apple gives you to develop programs for the Mac or the iPad or the iPhone. And I've been working on a project with a friend of mine to create an iPad app. And I'm not really a developer or coder, but I do know how to load projects into Xcode and to run them in simulation mode. And so even if you're not a developer, it's worth, I think you can buy Xcode for a nominal amount in the Mac App Store. And it's worth downloading and playing around with, because who knows, maybe you too will get the bug to become a developer and, play around with it. So check it out. Okay, so since it's spring, I thought I would mention a really nice article I read on MacLawyer.com, and it's entitled Spring Cleaning for Your Mac. And it's a very good overview that I guess came out on March 30th by Benjamin Stevens on how to get your Mac running smoothly and efficiently in the spring. And so he's just got some good pointers here, which I'll quickly mention. He says, really take out the trash. So you might forget that when you put things in trash, it's still sitting in your computer. So empty the trash. Organize your stuff. And then he says, many Mac users believe the desktop is the perfect place to store files. After all, it puts the files you use most often there, but it can slow things down. And I actually downloaded an app called Desk Today, which will just move everything on your desktop to a folder location that you could put somewhere. He's got other good pointers. Get rid of old iChat logs. Now, I don't use iChat, but he says if you use iChat, you can have the program store logs on your chats. By default, the program saves transcripts in a folder, and that can take up a lot of space, so you can empty those. He also points out delete application backups, and he says that many programs offer automatic backups and store copies of files in selected folders, just as iChat saves the chat logs. So he says if you use any application that saves a backup, you may find that it has tucked away several gigabytes of duplicate files. And deleting those files can save space and make using Spotlight much easier. He says get rid of mail downloads. And he points out that when you receive attachments to email messages in Apple's Mail, the files are stored with your messages at first, but if you double-click an attachment to view it or use your quick look to glance at it, Mail stores a copy in your library Mail downloads folder. So you may have dozens of files here occupying a huge amount of space. I'm going to check that because I haven't looked in there in a long time. He also says delete log files. He points out your Mac stores lots of log files, most of which you never need to review. So what you need to do is open the console application to see a list in the console message windows sidebar, which shows the different log files stored on your Mac. You can delete many of these files, and he says that there's a free utility called onx, which won't affect your Mac. I've never done that, but that's a good tip if it works. And he says weed out iTunes duplicates, and he points out if your iTunes library may have many duplicate files, and you can actually within iTunes you can go in and delete out the duplicates. And then his last point is reset Safari. If you use Apple Safari, some of the program's features can take up unnecessary space, he says. For instance, the cache file is intended to make your browser snappier, but you could easily, get a lot of storage in there, megabytes. So basically, he says just reset Safari. So I'm not sure if that's going to wipe out all your other settings, but generally think of ways, I guess, in the spring to clean up your Mac. I know that iPhoto stores a lot of excess files that you can, dump out. And I generally go through my downloads folder and delete things that I don't need anymore. And what I do so that I don't back up stuff to my online backup service, I have certain folders like the downloads folder, which I do not back up to backup. And I usually try to dump folders I'm using temporarily there, because then I know it won't be backed up either to my external Time Machine hard drive or to the cloud. Anyways, it's spring, so think of spring cleaning. Okay, the last story is about a new Twitter app called Tweetbot, and it's worth using. And if you're watching the video version of this, you can see me using it. And Tweet app costs only $2, and it's basically a real step up from using the free Twitter app on your iPhone. And I've been just using it a couple of days, and $2 isn't that much, and I think it's worth it. Now, the cool thing about Tweet app is that it's got a very nice user interface. Here in the video, you can see my two accounts, Max Future and Apple Feed by MF. And it just feels nice. And what's nice is if you click on a tweet, you get like right under the tweet, you get a little toolbar. But before I do that, one of the cool things is if you swipe right to left on someone's tweet that there's been a discussion, you can see all the discussions that have been conducted regarding that tweet. And I believe if you go right to left, something similar like that happens. And if you click on a tweet, you get a little toolbar that has like little buttons like forward, retweet, star. I guess settings allow you then to do things like post link to tweet or to send to Instapaper, so a window pops up. It's definitely more involved than the regular free Twitter client for your iPhone. The other cool thing is, you can obviously pop up links and open them in a browser. So it's just more detailed. And if you want, if you want to know much more about it, the blogger Sean Bank at seanbank.com has done a very nice write-up about Tweetbot. He has been testing it in alpha, so it's he's had much more time to play with it. So let me tell you what Sean Bank is saying. Okay, so here's the heart of what Sean Bank says. Sean Bank says Tweetbot has more personality than any other Twitter client out there. Every single pixel has been handcrafted in order to build the most custom-looking UI of any Twitter client I've seen. However, the sounds, the animations, the actions, everything has been thought through with intent, care, and fun. It all adds up to create a Twitter experience extravaganza. He then goes on to say, he's been testing Tweetbot since its early stages of alpha development, and he says it's become his exclusive Twitter client. And he gives 3 reasons why Tweetbot has wiggled its way into his life. 1, he uses Twitter far too often. 2, it seemed a disservice to nerds everywhere to not use Tweetbot when he had the opportunity. And most importantly, 3, many of the ways which he uses Twitter has been extremely well integrated into Tweetbot. And so he gives a couple of reasons why he finds Tweetbot so fantastic. He first goes on to say, tap and hold a tweet. When you tap and hold on an individual tweet, a list of options comes up and you can instantly send to Instapaper, email, the tweet, etc. He also goes on to say using lists as the main timeline. So this is a feature that I haven't really played around with, but that he highlights. He says Tweetbot does something that, so far as he knows, no other Twitter client lets you do. It lets you use a list as your main timeline. Any list that you have created or that you follow can become your main timeline. Simply tap the center of the top bar in which it says timeline, and you'll be presented with a screen showing all the lists you have created or that you follow. So that's pretty cool. Now, this is something I did mention, which he highlights. Swiping left to right for a conversation view. And he says, this probably happens to you as well. I will often walk in on the middle of a conversation that is happening in Twitter between people whom I follow, and I want to read the rest of the conversation thread. In Tweetbot, you simply swipe an individual tweet from left to right, and it will load the conversation view. So that's very cool. Similarly, he says swiping on a tweet from right to left will show you all the replies to a tweet. So these are, very cool features. Okay, so some other features that he highlights are that when you go to sign in your Instapaper account and you try using the wrong email or address or password, you have sort of an animation of a falling dialog box. So it's kind of cool. In other words, it's got a lot of sort of animation. So if you don't like animation, I wouldn't get this app because it's a very souped up UI interface. Now, finding a user, he says when you type the @ symbol while composing a tweet, a small little user profile icon appears. You tap on that icon and you'll be brought to a list of all the people you follow, and you can quickly search for and find a user. Now that's very cool. It's sort of like an address book of the people you follow. Now direct messages, he says direct messages threads are top posted like your Twitter timeline rather than bottom posted like Instant Messenger or the official Twitter apps. So, I guess the advantage of not bottom posting is that if you spend a lot of time with your direct messages, it's easier to get to. When he says when you're using Twitter, there can be a lot of going on in the background, such as your tweets being posted or your links being saved to Instapaper. And he says that most Twitter and even RSS reader apps will have a small, somewhat opaque box that spins while the link is being saved and then gives a checkbox once the link is saved successfully. He says Tapbots already has their own version of this sort of feedback box that was designed and implemented in Pastebot. For example, when making edits to an image, you get the little spinning lines while the iPhone processes the edits, and then checkmark and a ding once the edits are completed. So, however, in Tapbots, they rethought even this bit of their Twitter client, and instead of a box getting in your way and sitting over the top of your timeline, a notification slides down from the top letting you know that your tweet was successfully posted or that your link has been saved to your ever-growing Instapaper queue. So he really raves about this app. And, my view is like, look, if you're just looking for simple Twitter options, just stick with the Twitter app that's free that Twitter makes. However, if you're looking to explore more interesting features and be more involved with Twitter, I think it's worth spending $2 for this new app that's gotten a lot of hype on the internet. Okay, well, thanks for listening to episode 67 of the Apple Podcast. This is April 15th, and if you'd like to leave a voicemail, or you can do so at 617-826-9676, or email me at maxfuture@gmail.com. Again, it's been episode 67 on April 15th. Thanks for listening.